Hello, I'm Paul Zimmy Finn, and this is the Generation Report. In the 1990s, historians William Strauss and Neil Howe predicted that America would pass through an era of crisis shortly after the beginning of the new century. This prediction stemmed from two of the core assertions of their generational theory. The relationship between generations and history brings about a rhythm in history itself, and this rhythm produces great crises which bring about America's civic transformation on a recurring schedule. At the time, many were skeptical and dismissive of Strauss and Howe's assertions. Soon after the 1997 publishing of their signature work, The Fourth Turning, a review of the book in The New Yorker referred to their theory as, quote, mystifying, non-falsifiable, and pseudoscience, unquote. Yet, here we are. All around us in 2019, we see that America is in a crisis, exactly as they predicted. Still, a chorus of voices persists in deriding Strauss and Howe's generational theory and in disparaging Strauss and Howe themselves. That isn't surprising, for the notion of history is characterized by a rhythm that recurs as an affront to the beliefs of many people. Either way, the situation America finds itself in today is a dire one. Because we are in a crisis today, we need to understand why Strauss and Howe predicted we would find ourselves in this position. In short, we need to understand their generational theory. Over the next 5 episodes, beginning with this one, I will present a series of discussions that, in building on one another, provide the essential framework behind Strauss and Howe's generational theory. Here, I begin with 6 concepts, some basic, some more complex, which lay the first piece of that foundation. Concept number 1, a human life. This is the most fundamental and foundational concept. Everyone listening right now is alive. Everyone listening right now was born. Everyone listening right now will someday die. Some people have the misfortune to live only a few short years. Some people live for a very long time. Still more live for a duration somewhere in between. Most people, if permitted to do so by a combination of solid health, self-maintenance, and good fortune, can expect to live somewhere between 65 and 100 years. This is evident in both our observable reality and in collected empirical data. Advancements in medicine, exercise, diet, shelter, and assorted technologies have increased life expectancy steadily throughout much of the world over centuries, but the expanded range of 65 to 100 years as a typical long human life has been a benchmark for far longer. This stems from the biological rhythms which naturally manifest within and upon the human body. Human bodies quite often sustain for 65 or 70 or 80 years, sometimes for 90 years, seldom for 100 years, rarely for more than 100 years. And humans, like all living things, seek to reproduce, and of course many do. Between years approximately a century apart in time, the lion's share of a human population is born, lives, dies, and is replaced by new people who do the same. Concept number 2, men and women. The relationship between men and women is the building block of everything in life. Every person who has ever been born, or who will ever live, is testament to this fact. The ripple effects of this reach into all aspects of the way we live. Every city ever built, every advance in knowledge ever achieved, every disease cured, every great work of art completed and presented, every country or empire forged, has been made possible by the relationship between men and women being complementary by nature. It has become commonplace in the era of varied gender expressions and largely deconstructed traditional gender roles to take this notion of men and women as complements for granted or dismiss it outright. That doesn't make it any less true. Concept number 3, history. Merriam-Webster defines history in 2 basic contexts. In the most popularly understood form, it is a, quote, chronological record or branch of knowledge that records and explains past events, unquote. In a more time-specific sense, it is a, quote, story or record of a person or event, unquote. Both definitions have relevance. History is both an arc of people and events in the past building up to the present day, each in its own way contributing to the state of things in the present, and a continually refreshed ledger of the deeds, records, and accounts of living people. History happens every day, shaping events, people, and the future in countless ways. We are who we are because of who and what came before us. The people who follow us will be who they are because of who we are and what we do. Concept number 4. Units of time. As time moves forward, things change. Fruit ripens and spoils. Seeds become saplings, become trees. Caterpillars metamorphose into butterflies. Chicks grow full feathers. Children grow into adults. To describe how the world evolves from what was to what is, time is broken into measurable units. 4 distinct units of time will be discussed briefly here. Unit number 1. Periods. Merriam-Webster defines period as, quote, an extent of time, unquote, a clearly defined duration to which exact boundaries of beginning and ending are affixed. Years, decades, and centuries are all periods because they measure the passage of time in exact increments. One orbit of the Earth around the Sun, 10 years and 100 years respectively. A period's duration is not always tidy, but because it invariably has both a distinct beginning and a distinct end, a period is always precise. Unit number 2. Discontinuities. A discontinuity is the breaking point at the end of a connected sequence of something. In the context of time, discontinuities are sharp breaks, moments that transform the state of something from what was to what is. Every period has its moment of discontinuity where one extent of time ends. By rule, another extent of time begins at the same moment. Unit number 3. Phases. Phases are distinct and sequential stages which mark a process of change during the life of someone or something. At the root of phases that manifest in the world lie rhythms in nature and the universe which are enduring. Accordingly, orbits, tides, and lunar sunlight are not processes that dissolve once they are completed, but progressions which conclude at a moment of discontinuity, begin again, and proceed through their phases in the same sequence as previously. Unit number 4. Cycles. Periods which progress through phases, discontinue, then repeat as before, are cycles. The origins of the term trace from the Latin word cyclus, which in turn traces from the Greek word kuklos, meaning circle. True to these ancient roots, a cycle is a circle that traces and completes a course over a path, one phase at a time, one repetition at a time. Just as the discontinuation of a phase ushers in the next phase, the discontinuation of a cycle ushers in the next cycle. For context, think of how the wheels of a bicycle rotate when a bicycle moves forward. The wheels continuously cover new ground as they move forward in a series of 360-degree rotations. The rotations of the wheels continue for as long as the bicycle remains in motion. This is precisely how time moves. Always forward, marked along the way by cycles. Here is how this comes together. As orbits, tides, lunar sunlight, and other cycles move through their extents of time, marked by moments of discontinuity and phases which always proceed in the same order, they infuse a rhythm into time itself. History is time. History, therefore, has its own periods, its own discontinuities, its own phases, and its own cycles. Concept number 5. Historical cycles. Historical cycles are generated by the passing of time and the accumulation of changes brought by people reshaping their social environment during their lifetimes. The two primary domains of the social environment people affect in a society are the institutions and the culture. In this discussion, institutions refers to the public framework that binds a society in common identification, and culture refers to the patchwork of trends, arts, social mores, and values regarded collectively in that society. Just like the cycles discussed earlier, cycles of history do not begin or end at random, and changes to institutions and cultures do not happen at random either. Institutions and cultures evolve because of changes brought to them over the course of a historical cycle, changes which ultimately reveal their significance at a specific moment, the moment when the cycle is completed. A society's historical cycle completes at the moment when its institutions and its culture reach the culmination of their mutual effort toward achieving a singular public purpose. This is the moment of discontinuity which formally closes a chapter of history and ushers in a new historical cycle. Since a society evolves according to the changes brought to it by people who live just once, these moments of discontinuity take place, approximately the length of a long human life apart. Therefore, the cycle of history is effectively the length of a long human life. Concept number 6. The saeculum. Saeculum is a term first used by the ancient Etruscans and used later by the Romans. Literally translating as natural century, it is the unit of time measuring approximately the length of a long human life and of the approximate span of the lifetime of a society's population. It is the cycle of history. Just like a typical long human life, a saeculum lasts between 65 and 100 years, and typically for a duration around 80 years. Although a saeculum's duration is not fixed, it is always precise. The saeculum endures because of a series of rhythms that persist in the natural world, in the biology of the human life cycle, and in human social interaction. As long as these natural, biological, and social dynamics persist, as long as the 6 concepts discussed here remain unchanged, time will always have cycles, and human history will always have seasons. Please tune in to the next episode, Generational Theory Part 2, Seasons in Nature, Seasons in Life, Seasons in History. Thank you for listening.